Welcome to the podcast, Stories from the World of Science. Our mission is to explain science in a simple and fun form that is open to all.
Hey there. Ready for a deep dive into a life story that's both inspiring and insightful?
I'm ready when you are.
Okay, great. So today we're diving into the world of Josef Stefan. That name might ring a bell, from the Stefan-Boltzmann law.
Ah, Stefan, a name that might not be a household name.
Right.
But his story goes way beyond just one equation.
Okay, so if you're anything like me, a single physics equation doesn't usually make me want to do a deep dive. But trust me on this one.
Okay.
Stefan's story, it's incredible. When we're talking about someone who started from incredibly humble beginnings, we're talking really humble, and he became a leading light in Austrian science.
And his journey, it really speaks to the idea of resilience. It speaks to passion, to just the sheer power of curiosity. We often forget that, the power of curiosity.
So true. So we're going to uncover how this physics pioneer, how he went from literally carrying sacks of flour in his father's mill.
Can you imagine? To then turn around and be shoulder to shoulder with the scientific elite of Vienna.
Wow, what a change. Okay, so that's quite a journey. Talk about upward mobility.
That really is. And you have to think about it. This is 19th century Austria we're talking about.
Right.
And his story unfolds during a really interesting time because there were all these educational reforms happening. And these reforms, they weren't perfect, not by a long shot, but they did open some doors for talented people.
Yeah.
People from underprivileged backgrounds, people who might have just been completely overlooked otherwise.
That's fascinating. Makes you wonder how many other brilliant minds might have been lost because they never had that chance. So Stefan's obviously brilliant, but it sounds like these reforms, they really played a role in letting his talent, come to the forefront.
Absolutely.
But here's where it gets even more interesting.
Okay.
So Stefan, he wasn't just a scientific mind. This guy, he also dabbled in poetry.
He did.
In Slovenian.
And this wasn't your typical poetry. We're talking about verses with scientific themes woven in.
Wow.
He had this amazing way of blending his love for language with this deep fascination he had with, the natural world. It's really something.
Okay, so this guy's got a well-rounded mind.
Yep.
To say the least.
Definitely.
But I understand his little adventure into Slovenian literature, it wasn't all smooth sailing, right?
Right, it wasn't. You see, to really get it, we need to rewind a bit. We need to understand the intellectual climate of Slovenia at that time.
Okay.
There was this huge debate raging about how accessible science should be.
Uh-huh.
Like some folks, they thought Slovenians weren't ready for hardcore science.
Oh, wow. Really?
Yeah. And one of the big voices in this whole thing, this writer, Fran Levstik, really influential guy, he believed that Slovenians needed to be wooed a bit. They needed compelling stories, narratives, that kind of thing.
So ease them into it.
Exactly. Before they could really wrap their heads around these tougher, complex scientific concepts.
So it was about how to make science, fun, maybe even a little entertaining for everyone else, not just the scientists.
Exactly. Making it palatable.
Right. So did Stefan, did he buy into this? Did he try to make his science more accessible?
He did. He really tried. He even tried his hand at writing these science articles in Slovenian, trying to, build a bridge between the hard science and everyday people.
That's really something. That shows real commitment.
It does.
So did he actually succeed?
Well, let's just say he faced an uphill battle. The intellectual climate, it wasn't really on his side. And on top of that, translating complicated scientific ideas into Slovenian, it's not easy.
Yeah.
The vocabulary, it just wasn't always there. And you know what? Stefan actually wrote about this. He said it was like having a basket full of German knowledge and a handful of Slovenian words.
Wow. That's actually really sad in a way, It shows you how language can be a barrier, but also how dedicated he was to trying to share his passion.
It really does.
Makes you wonder what could have been, if he kept going with the public writing.
It's a what if, for sure. But it seems like Levstik's criticisms, they stung a bit, and that combined with his own struggles with the language. Well, Stefan eventually shifted gears.
Okay.
He stepped away from public writing and really dove headfirst into his academic career.
So that's a pretty pivotal moment then, because, well, it's fascinating to imagine what he could have done as like a Slovenian science communicator.
Yeah.
This decision to focus on academia, Well, it led to some amazing breakthroughs. But before we get to those, let's rewind a little bit back to his, early university years. I mean, can you imagine this young Stefan coming from a life surrounded by, sacks of flour and all that? He ends up in these prestigious halls of academia. That must have been a huge adjustment.
Oh, absolutely. It was a whole different world. He enrolled at the University of Vienna back in 1853, just soaking up knowledge like a sponge.
He must have been so hungry for it.
Oh, he was. And he was brilliant. He excelled in all his studies. But let me tell you, life wasn't all rosy for the young scholar.
I was going to say it couldn't have been easy.
No, it wasn't. He was really struggling financially.
Yeah, that's not surprising, given his background. So how do you manage? I mean, were there scholarships back then? Grants for students like him?
Well, you see, even though Austria had those education reforms, they didn't exactly erase the challenges of paying for a good education.
Right.
But Stefan, true to his nature, he found a way. He juggled his studies with a bunch of part-time jobs. He taught physics to pharmacy students.
Huh.
He took on private tutoring gigs, anything he could get his hands on. And he spent hours, countless hours, assisting with research in the university's lab. Talk about dedication, right?
Yeah.
This guy was driven to learn no matter what.
And that drive, that fire in him, it would pay off, wouldn't it? I mean, didn't he have this chance meeting a real stroke of luck with a big name in the science world back then?
He did. So picture this. It's 1857. Stefan's giving a lecture at the Vienna Academy. This is a big deal.
Yeah, top tier, right?
Exactly. And in the audience just happens to be Carl Ludwig. Now, this guy was a giant. We're talking a leading physiologist known for having a keen eye for talent.
Okay, so Ludwig's a big shot, and he's sitting there listening to Stefan. What did he see in him? I mean, Stefan was still pretty green at this point, right?
Ludwig, he saw a kindred spirit. Someone who shared his passion for, really digging into the mysteries of science. He was impressed by Stefan's mind, obviously, but also by how committed he was to doing things right, to being rigorous in his experiments.
You saw that spark.
Absolutely. So when Ludwig found out about Stefan's, shall we say, tight financial situation and the fact that he didn't have access to a proper lab.
Yeah, those are kind of important for a scientist last time I checked.
Just a tad. Anyway, Ludwig offers him a position at his own institute, the Institute of Physiology at the University of Vienna.
Wow. Talk about a game changer. It's amazing how these chance encounters, they can really change the trajectory of your whole life.
It makes you think about mentors, right? How important they are. That helping hand can make all the difference.
For sure. And for Stefan, this was just the beginning. Didn't he become like the youngest full professor in all of Austria? And in just a few years?
He did. It's incredible, right? From struggling student to a top academic position, all in the blink of an eye.
That's meteoric. How is that even possible?
Well, a few things came together. Of course, there's his talent. You can't deny that. And he worked incredibly hard. But there was also a bit of luck involved, let's be honest.
Okay, like what?
A position opened up, just happened to, at the University of Vienna's Physics Institute.
It's convenient timing.
Right. And Stefan, with his growing reputation, and of course Ludwig vouching for him, he was the obvious choice. So by 1863, there he is, leading the most prestigious physics research center in the entire country.
From flour sacks to physics fame.
Right.
What a story. But, from what I've heard, it wasn't just the science. It seems, Stefan, he wasn't just brilliant. He was also an amazing teacher, someone who really left a mark on his students.
Oh, absolutely. And we're lucky enough to have some firsthand accounts from those students. They give us a real glimpse into what it was like to learn from the man himself.
Oh, really? Like what?
So there's this one student, even Ubik. He describes Stefan's lectures as exemplary in every respect, truly classic.
High praise.
Right. And he talks about how Stefan, he had this calm demeanor, this way of taking the most complicated things and making them clear, making them engaging.
That's a skill, especially with physics. It's easy to get lost in the weeds with that stuff.
Tell me about it. And Ubik, he also mentions Stefan's subtle sense of humor. Apparently, he kept things lively, He didn't take himself too seriously.
I like that. A scientist who can make you laugh while he's blowing your mind.
Exactly. And speaking of inspiring students, we can't talk about Stefan without mentioning his most famous pupil, a guy by the name of Ludwig Boltzmann.
Ah, yes.
Yeah.
The other half of the Stefan-Boltzmann law. I always found their relationship fascinating. And talk about a study in contrast. You've got Stefan, the quiet, meticulous experimenter from such humble beginnings.
All right.
And then you have Boltzmann, who's known for being this more, flamboyant personality, theoretically minded.
Mm-hmm.
And he came from a wealthy family, right?
A real odd couple on the surface, wouldn't you say?
Totally.
Totally.
And yet they formed this incredible bond. It just goes to show you science can bring people together, even if they're complete opposites in every other way.
It's true. They had a deep respect for each other, a shared love for science that really bound them together. And Boltzmann himself, he actually said that Stefan had this magical influence on his students.
Magical. That's quite the compliment.
It is. He describes Stefan's institute as a symbol of serious and inspiring experimental work.
It really speaks to Stefan's ability to create this environment where people could do their best work, even if their best work was different from his own. It's like he wasn't threatened by other people's brilliance.
He fostered it.
Exactly. Okay, but before we dive into all of the amazing scientific discoveries that Stefan made, can we rewind a little? I think it's important to set the scene, paint a picture of what was happening in the world of physics back then.
Okay, sure.
What were the big questions, the theories that were really captivating the minds of scientists like Stefan?
So imagine this. It's a time of incredible change and discovery in physics. We're talking about a period where our understanding of the universe is being completely revolutionized.
Okay, sounds dramatic. I like it.
Think about it. Maxwell's equations, they had just been published,
Yeah.
bringing together electricity, magnetism, light. It was groundbreaking.
Yeah, those are still a cornerstone of, everything we know about electromagnetism.
Right. And at the same time, the whole field of thermodynamics, it's being built from the ground up. And don't even get me started on the nature of light itself. Huge debates raging about that.
So much we didn't know.
It was an exciting time to be a physicist, that's for sure. Full of unknowns, ripe for the picking,
Wow, what a time to be alive. So Stefan finds himself right in the thick of this scientific revolution, leading this prestigious institute during, the golden age of physics. Talk about an opportunity to make your mark.
And make his mark, he did. He had this knack for bridging the gap, between the theoretical side of physics and then actually doing the experiments.
Oh, so he wasn't content with just, coming up with equations on a chalkboard.
Yeah. Exactly. He wanted to get his hands dirty, test them out, see how they worked in the real world. He was pushing the limits of what was even possible with experiments back then.
A true scientist, huh?
Absolutely.
So where do we even begin? What were some of his biggest contributions, his claim to fame?
Well, his work, it spanned quite a range, from sound waves to how ice forms, fascinating stuff. But if we had to pick two areas where he really left his mark.
Yeah, like the top hits.
Exactly. It would have to be his work on how gases conduct heat.
Okay.
And, of course, his groundbreaking research on blackbody radiation.
Okay, so let's start with the gases. I'm not going to lie, thermal conductivity of gases doesn't exactly scream, exciting breakthrough, at least not to me.
Right.
So why was this such a big deal back then?
It sounds basic now, right? But back in Stefan's day, just the idea that gases could even conduct heat, it was debated. Some people didn't believe it.
Really? Wow, we've come a long way.
We have, but that's what's so great about Stefan. He didn't just theorize, he built this ingenious device, a diathermometer.
Gaia what?
A diathermometer. It sounds fancy, but it's pretty elegant, actually. Imagine a glass bulb filled with gas and a thermometer inside to measure any temperature changes.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
So he'd apply a known amount of heat to the bulb and bam, he could calculate how well that gas conducted heat.
So this little device helped settle a fundamental question in physics.
Exactly. And what he found out, it wasn't just that gases could conduct heat. He figured out there was this relationship, this connection between how well a gas conducts heat and its viscosity, how much a fluid resists flowing.
Okay, so he found a link between these two things that seemed totally unrelated.
Yep. And that was huge because it helped scientists start to see thermodynamics in a more unified way.
Okay, I'm starting to see why this was such a big deal.
It revolutionized the field.
Okay, you sold me. Now, what about his most famous work? The one that made it into the textbooks, blackbody radiation. I'm pretty sure I learned about this back in school, but could you give us a little refresher?
Sure. Imagine this, a theoretical black box. It's this perfect absorber. It just sucks up all the electromagnetic radiation that hits it, no matter what kind of radiation. Light, heat, everything.
Okay, like a cosmic vacuum cleaner.
Perfect analogy. Now, this black body, it absorbs everything, but it also emits radiation. And the kind of radiation it emits, that depends on its temperature.
Okay, so the hotter the box, the more.
The more it radiates.
Yeah, right, got it. But why was it so important to figure this out?
Because it held the key to understanding light and energy itself, how it all worked.
So So Stefan cracked the code, figured out how to perfectly measure this black body radiation.
Well, not quite from scratch. He actually built upon what others had done. There was this Irish physicist, John Tyndall.
Okay.
He had made some good progress measuring the infrared radiation, the heat coming from a heated platinum filament.
Yeah.
Stefan took Tyndall's data, really analyzed it, and that's when he had his eureka moment.
And this is 1879, right? When he publishes his famous paper.
That's the one. The title, a bit of a mouthful, but it was basically on the relationship between thermal radiation and temperature.
Catchy.
Right. But that paper introduced the world to what we now call Stefan's law.
Okay, what does Stefan's law actually say?
Well, in simple terms, it says that the hotter the black body gets, the more energy it radiates. And it's not just a little bit more, it's a lot more.
So the hotter something is, the brighter it glows.
Exactly.
That seems kind of obvious.
Maybe now, but back then, this was revolutionary.
Okay, I'm convinced. Now, quick question. Why do we usually call it the Stefan-Boltzmann law? Didn't Boltzmann have a hand in this too?
He did. And this is where the story gets even better. So a few years after Stefan figures this out experimentally, Boltzmann comes along, and he uses thermodynamics and electromagnetism to derive the same law, theoretically.
No way. So Stefan figured it out through experiments, and then Boltzmann came in and proved it mathematically.
Exactly. A real 1-2 punch. It shows how these two sides of science, the experiments and the theory, they work together, They reinforce each other.
For sure. And I guess that's why both their names are on it. It's only fair.
Precisely. And, the Stefan-Boltzmann law, fun fact, it's actually the only major physical law that's named after a Slovenian scientist.
Wow. Stefan's legacy lives on. But we can't forget about his other contributions, like his work in electrotechnology. That's a field that feels especially relevant today, wouldn't you say?
Couldn't agree more. And Stefan, with his grasp of electromagnetism, he was captivated by everything happening in that field.
And this is like the dawn of the electrical age, right?
Yeah.
Light bulbs, telegraphs, it's all happening so fast.
Exactly. Imagine that time, electricity, it's going from this scientific curiosity to this powerful force that's changing everything.
Yeah, it must have felt like the future was right there.
Absolutely. And Stefan, he's right there in the middle of it all. He really understood how significant Maxwell's equations were, maybe more than a lot of other scientists at the time. He saw the potential there, how they could reshape the world.
So how did he contribute? What kinds of things was he working on?
Oh, a bit of everything. He was studying alternating currents, electromagnetic induction. He even developed a way to measure the electrical resistance in liquids.
Wow, so not just the theory, he was coming up with practical solutions too.
That's Stefan, always the practical scientist. And his influence went way beyond the lab. In 1883, they made him president of the Technical Scientific Committee for the International Electrotechnical Exhibition. It was held in Vienna.
Okay, stop right there. This exhibition, what was it like? I'm imagining like a giant showcase of all the latest and greatest gadgets, right?
Yeah. It was like stepping into the future. A huge hall filled with the latest marvels of electrical engineering. Arc lamps lighting up the space, telephones, electric motors powering all these machines. It must have been quite a sight.
Can you imagine? And Stefan was right there leading the charge.
He was a driving force. And not long after, he helped establish the Electrotechnical Society in Vienna. Later, they renamed it the Austrian Society for Electrotechnics. But guess who they picked as their very first president?
Stefan.
The one and only. I mean, it really speaks volumes about how highly regarded he was in the field.
He seemed to really thrive as a leader, bringing people together, collaborating. It's something we often forget about the greats, It's not always about working alone in your lab. It's about bringing others along with you.
Exactly, building a community.
So as we're wrapping up this deep dive, I have to admit, there's this bittersweet feeling. We've seen how much Stefan accomplished, but his life, it was cut short far too soon.
It's a reminder that even the brightest minds, they're not here forever. In 1891, when he was 56, Stefan, he found love, married this woman, Maria Neumann. She was a widow from his home region in Carinthia. It seemed like a happy ending, right?
It does. A well-deserved one.
But sadly, it wasn't meant to be. Just a year after they married, Stefan had a stroke.
Oh, no.
He passed away soon after. In 1893, he was only 57.
So much potential gone. It makes you think, what else could he have accomplished?
It's hard not to wonder, but what a life he lived.
Absolutely. So as we say goodbye to Josef Stefan today, what do you think? What's his most important legacy? What should people remember him for?
Oh, that's a tough one. It's like asking to choose a favorite star. His scientific discoveries, especially his work on thermal conductivity and black body radiation, that's huge. It's still shaping our understanding of how the universe works. And then there's his dedication to teaching. He inspired so many students, many of whom went on to achieve amazing things themselves because of him.
Right. A true mentor.
And we can't forget his leadership in the world of electrotechnology. He helped bring about a technological revolution, one that we're still benefiting from today.
That's what I find so inspiring about Stefan's story. It's about so much more than just equations and textbooks.
He was a pioneer, a mentor, and a true visionary.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Well, on that note, we'll leave you with this thought. As you go about your day, just take a moment to appreciate all the unseen forces at play. The way heat flows, the way things glow, the electricity that powers your world.
It's all connected.
It is. These everyday wonders, we often take them for granted, but they're all tied to the legacy of Josef Stefan, a man who dedicated his life to unraveling the mysteries of the natural world.
To the curious mind.
Absolutely. To curiosity and to never giving up on your dreams. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and as always, keep diving deep.
You just listened to the podcast, Stories from the World of Science, written by Sasho Dolines.